All right, this will be my evidently long-awaited review of Outlander Season 7, Episode 8, the mid-season finale. And as always, you know the drill here. This will have spoilers for the books and the show, so if you are looking to avoid those, please do keep on scrolling. So we got a lot to break down here. I'll preface with I really enjoyed this episode, and it was extremely true to the books. And I also want to point out that it's incredibly commendable that the show has already completed all of An Echo in the Bone at the mid-season finale of Season 7. So that means the second half will probably largely cover Written in My Own Heart's Blood. And Season 8, we have plenty of time to cover the remainder of the story and wrap it up in a nice neat bow, hopefully. So at the end of episode 7, we saw that Jamie was on the battlefield. He had been injured, and book readers weren't sure if he was alive or dead. Book readers did know that he was, in fact, alive. And this was a scene that I was extremely excited for, but also curious how the show is going to cover. We can see that this woman and her son are walking about the field looking for dead or injured soldiers and taking any of their valuables from them. Her husband presumably is dead, so she needs to be able to fend for herself, and they find Jamie. And we can see that he had his portrait of William on his person. This is a very important episode for Jamie's character, particularly because he has a very strong sense of duty to both of his biological children. He is fighting for the future that Brianna will have in America, and he is also trying very hard not to fight against William, and this portrait is a reminder of that inner conflict that Jamie is also dealing with on top of the revolution. I will put snippets from the books in this part here, but this was very true to the storyline. They ad-libbed a little bit of the dialogue, but I thought it was perfect how Claire steps in, sees the woman, and immediately picks up Jamie's sword to defend him. And I was so excited to visually see this represented on screen, and it did not disappoint. Neither did the follow-up when these two people finally leave Jamie's body, and we get like the slightest bit of humor and like comical relief that I think was so needed in this moment, just because for non-book readers it probably felt like Jamie was seriously injured. So when he finally looks at Claire and is able to crack a joke, it's just like a nice feeling we all get. And this particular look and exchange between Jamie and Claire very strongly reminded me from Season 2, the episode Preston Pans, when Jamie returns back to the camp to find Claire, and he's covered in blood and dirt like he is in the scene here, and he's just so shocked and relieved to see her face again. He has the same look here, and Claire has the same sense of huge relief that he is alive, but she also is angry with him, obviously. And while she's checking over his body for wounds and he's cracking all these jokes, and again, like I'll put the snippets of the direct dialogue from the books, they just had such a nice reminiscent moment of, particularly I would say Season 2 for me, but the Jamie and Claire that we all loved from the earlier seasons, when the stakes are high and Claire once again is able to save Jamie and is pissed that she has to follow him around her whole life and so parts back on him. Also, shout out to the line of her being a Bonnie Wee swordsman being used. I loved that. In the episode preview, we see this boot hanging off of the horse. We know that that eventually is Simon Fraser. And when Claire finally gets Jamie set aside so she can examine him, this is where we get the first change from the books. In the books, Jamie blocks the sword with his hand, and he catches the hilt of the sword mainly, so it doesn't cut all the way through his hand or cut his hand clean in half. But the injury is severe enough that Claire has to remove his finger. And it is a finger that he had broken numerous times, and it was kind of frozen, like the joints were frozen, and it was causing him a lot of inconvenience. So she actually surgically removes it in this scene, and in the show, obviously, they've chosen to not have to do that to Jamie. I'm sure it's just because it would be impossible to have Sam Heughan walk around with a missing finger, and the cost of that would just be stupid. And I just loved this scene, and particularly Sam Heughan's acting in it. This was very reminiscent to me of Wentworth, the first time that Claire fixed Jamie's hand. And it's important to remember that at that time, and even with the snake bite, Jamie did not want to be an incomplete man. He didn't want to have to remove his finger. He didn't want to have to cut off his leg. And this is the first time where he's okay with that possibility. And he tells Claire, if you need to remove it, I will be okay with that. And there's this beautiful passage where he says to Claire that if he were to lose the finger, it would have been lost for all the right reasons, because he found out after the fact that his actions were able to save some of the men in the army. And the whole passage was just so beautiful. Again, I'll put snippets here. And I loved when Claire says to him, you bloody man, I knew you'd make me cry. But I also think it's important to point out that unlike at the Abbey, when Jamie was very traumatized and was kind of refusing to let Claire touch him or get close to him, he is very, very much holding on to Claire's strength in this moment and completely trusts her. And it's just a very different experience than it was in season 1 when he first had this issue with his hand. So I just love the mirroring and parallels in this scene. When Claire finally has him all stitched up, has him on laudanum, when they lay down together and she says this line, I just absolutely loved it. I thought it was perfect. She very rarely says my love, or the two of them, I mean, Jamie is obviously affectionate with her, but Claire is not as vocal about her affections with Jamie, I would argue. So anytime she gives us a little something, I really love it. And it's at this point that we switch back over to the future with Roger and Bree, and Roger tells Bree that he is going to go through the stones back into the past in order to find Jemmy, because he believes that Rob Cameron has taken Jemmy through the stones. Book readers know that he actually has not, and Jemmy is trapped in the tunnel that Rob Cameron had locked Bree in earlier in the season. And when they were discussing whether or not Roger should go, Buck Mackenzie says that he will go with Roger, and they wanted to send him back through anyway, so he will help Roger and accompany him. In the books, there's a really nice passage, and I think I mentioned it in a previous video, about how Buck recognizes that Jeremiah is his kin, and he feels an obligation to save him because it's clearly like this very long legacy that he has created with his bloodline, and he wants to make sure that that is maintained. So Buck has decided to go with Roger at this point. It's not that I don't like the Bree and Roger storyline. I actually really do in the books, and I really like Buck Mackenzie and everything that will be coming up with him and Roger in the second half of the season. But I think that the strength of this episode was very clearly to me that it was Jamie and Claire centric, and we got less of Roger and Bree. I don't know if anyone else agrees with that, but I just felt strongly that that kind of helped the episode. We cut back to Jamie, Claire, and young Ian, and they're discussing basically that there's going to be a second battle happening, and Jamie is obviously like checking the progress of his hand. Claire has this wonderful line in the books and in the show where she promises that he will have a functioning hand, and we can see in this episode and in this scene that he is flexing it and he can use it. But it's definitely a very high tension time, and because young Ian knows that Claire is from the future and knows the outcome of this battle, that adds to the stakes. I can't say enough how much I love young Ian and John Bell as young Ian, and this episode, the more the merrier with John Bell and young Ian, but the next scene when he goes to find Rachel Hunter was chef's kiss. These two have great chemistry. They have like that friendly banter, but they also have this like clear tension, and this scene from the books was one of my favorites, and I thought it was perfectly acted because young Ian has this kind of naivete and not immaturity, but like he's still a young man, and John Bell brings that to him, and the actress Izzy who plays Rachel offsets that really well, and I loved this scene. So I'm gonna break here and then do a part 2 so we can further talk about this. So come back for part 2.